Here we are for another round of the 70s versus the 90s, and it's buddy comedy noir style when I put Robert Culp's Hickey and Boggs against John Gray's The Glimmer Man. And this one was a hard decision to pick because both of these movies kind of do the same thing, and all the complaints I had for one, the other one did. So let's just dive right on into the nitty and the picky. First up, we have Robert Culp's Hickey and Boggs, which stars the I Spy duo of Bill Cosby and Robert Culp. And now they're a lot grittier than they were in that show, and they're not spies, they're private investigators. And what kicks off all this stuff is there's a woman named Mary Jane she's got a hold of some money that belongs to some criminal organization, and she's got a whole racket with her husband that's in jail that they're trying to fence all this money, and then that sets in motion all these hired killers trying to find the money. And then of course somebody gets in touch with the private investigators to Hickey and Boggs to figure out where all this stuff's going on, and then they end up right in the middle of the shit. And the film, like I said, is directed by Robert Culp, and it's a script written by the great Walter Hill. Now, Walter Hill being one of the greatest directors who also got his start as a screenwriter, and of course he had not directed a film at this point. Now, I would argue had Walter Hill directed this film, it would have been a lot better, or any other director, like maybe even somebody on a caliber of Sam Peckinpah. But Robert Culp, of course, being mostly a television actor, and he makes this film kind of feel like an edgy TV movie. There's a little bit of tits and ass that are alluded to, and not very much coarse language. The most off the wall shit, of course, is the criminal organization and stuff. Like Michael Moriarty is one of the people in it. That Bill Hickman, of course, who's the motherfucker that Steve McQueen's chasing in the French or the in Bullet. And but then of course the cops are equally as over the fucking top. Vincent Gardenia is with his weird fucking nose yelling and screaming, and he calls the Hickey and Boggs the Cats and Jammer Kids. And then of course you got a really young James Woods in it, Ed Lauder, of course, who was the asshole guard from The Longest Yard, and a bevy of other motherfuckers in it too. But of course the centerpiece is Bill Cosby and Robert Culp as Hickey and Boggs. And of course, they're, like I said, they're a lot grittier than most of the shit that either one of them had done. There's a little bit of humor in it too, very understated. It's not very over the top. This is not necessarily a silly movie. Like I said, it's like a gritty, made for TV movie, but there is a lot of action in it too. It seems like every time they turn around, Hickey and Boggs are in some kind of shootout, and the fucking villains fire off more bullets than the fucking A team ever thought of. And what's crazy too, you got Hickey and Boggs, they just got what looks like shit that's like even bigger than a 44 Magnum. And then Boggs can't shoot for shit. Hickey's a pretty good shot, but motherfuckers only have 6 bullets in them guns. So it's one of those things. It's like there's a moment in time and in the film where Boggs is like, I think I need a bigger gun, I can't hit nothing. It's like, well, maybe you should learn to fucking shoot. But there's several of these shootouts, and even the ending little Mexican standoff that they have, because there's a plane and a helicopter, and they shoot the shit out of those cars. And then but finally, like, Boggs finally gets him somebody. He shoots Michael Moriarty, who's in that helicopter firing a bunch of bullets and stuff. And and then Hickey kills the dude, because they kill Bill Cosby's woman in the film. And of course he's very torn by that. And also these characters are like real just ragged, alcohol soaked smartasses that just like they kind of have a coat of on. Like, honestly, I don't even think like these two were the better fit for this role. I think if it was better cast, then it would have been a better movie too. Because also I feel like it's just Culp and Cosby trying to shed their nice guy images that they had in I Spy. But like I said, the film checks all the boxes for a gritty modern noir of the 70s. But if we move forward to John Gray's The Glimmer Man, starring Steven Seagal and Keenan Ivory Wayans, who they're cops in L.A. that are they're tracking down a serial killer that they call the Family Man. Does all this weird religious imagery with he like crucifies his victims and all this stuff. And right off the bat, you can tell that this is going to be a quirky pair because, of course, Keenen Ivory Wayans, one of the greatest comedic minds of all time. And then you see him cracking jokes, is walking through the police department. And then you see Steven Seagal looking like a damn medicine man shaman and shit. And of course, there's many jokes made about that. But and the chemistry that these two have is a little better than Culp and Cosby and stuff. Because like what's crazy is most of the time with Steven Seagal, like his delivery and when he tries to be funny is just absolute garbage. But here he's got somebody that he actually has to bring his A game with because Keenen Ivory Wayans, like I said, one of the greatest comedic minds. If Steven Seagal doesn't up his A game, he's gonna look like a fucking idiot. And that's one thing that Steven Seagal didn't want to do, even though sometimes he did. But here in this one, he manages to hold his own comedically with Keenen Ivory Wayans, and their back and forth is really funny. Like that scene in the medicine shop, and is like, I'm black, right? And then the fucking powdered deer penis and all this shit, and then of course like Keenen Ivory Wayans has got a obsession with the movie Casablanca, see him crying in the theater and stuff, and then they always giving each other shit. But then of course like like in every fucking movie that Steven Seagal is in, he's always some like ghost operative for the CIA or some other government entity, plucked from Vietnam and all this shit. And he also knows like a shit ton of karate and all this stuff, but he can't fight. He can fight, but he's not supposed to fight because of his religion and shit. The action in this one is a lot better, as far as like they don't shoot a million bullets at shit. Near the end, there is that Mexican standoff in that hotel that's pretty good. And then, of course, it's one of the better ones where he showcases his fighting techniques, because he beats the shit out of a lot of people. That little blade on the credit card, that was pretty badass. Cuts all those Russian gangsters' throats and stuff. And and then the side characters are just as animated as they are in Hickey and Boggs, very over the top, with all the fucking internal affairs shit and stuff. And there's a point in time where they think Steven Seagal's the serial killer, but then it turns out that it's these fucking gangster criminal organization covering it up because they're smuggling like chemical weapons from Russia, and they're trying to cover it up by killing off the people that are involved in it or that know shit about it. And that way there's two different serial killers going on, but they make it look like one. So it's not a bad written script, very tropomatic, but it's not to say that the screenwriter for the Glimmer Man is somebody named Kevin Broadbent is better than Walter Hill. Like I said, I think the director John Gray, he's like a hack journeyman, but a capable enough director to know what this movie needs to be. He lets the actors Keenen Ivory Wayans and Steven Seagal run with the material and do their thing. It's not quite a Riggs and Murtaugh set dynamic, but it definitely checks the boxes of that type of film because, of course, like a film like Lethal Weapon definitely set the bar for buddy cop movies and stuff. And this one is one of the better ones of the 90s and stuff. Like I said, the action is very riveting, like when he beats the shit out of all those motherfuckers in the damn restaurant and stuff. And of course Brian Cox is very like sinister in the film. Like he's not really the most fucked up one in the film. The guy that plays the warden from the Shawshank Redemption, he's the worst one of them all. Like that guy's a major piece of shit, and they all get them to go after each other in the end. So the thing about it is there is nothing out of place in this film. Everything kind of leads into the next thing, and it's definitely a more fun movie than Hickey and Boggs. Hickey and Boggs is kind of depressing, and it doesn't really, further anything. The thing about it is where both of these movies end, this is where it all comes down to the decision is Hickey and Boggs, and they win essentially, but then that still doesn't mean nothing. It never did. And then, and of course they win at the end of the Glimmer Man. All the bad guys are disposed of and shit. And as they're hauling Keenen Ivory Wayans in that hospital, in that ambulance and shit, And he's talking shit to Seagal and stuff. But you kind of see like, you know, there probably was a missed opportunity. They probably could have did a sequel to this film. I don't think they could have did a sequel to Hickey and Boggs because I feel like they were done being private investigators after that. But these guys are still going to be cops. You know, this is all they really know is what they're good at. You know, even though, you know, Steven Seagal looks like he should be fucking, you know, doing a rain dance in some fucking tribe or some shit. He still is like a really good cop, you know. So this round has to go to the Glimmer Man because what would have decided it is like most like I've complained in previous episodes, a lot of those Steven Seagal movies and even some of the Stallone movies and a few other like action films of the 90s, and mind you, this is something that they got from the 80s. It was always a shitty song at the end of these movies that just, you know, in a way like heavy-handedly pointed out what went on in the movie and just like made you want to hurl chunks. And normally that would take points off if Hickey and Boggs didn't do the same fucking thing. You know, it's like this somber song that like fucking says everything that happened in the movie. And so it's like, I got to give it to the Glimmer Man on this one. You know, like I said, it was a very hard decision. It was because like I said, both of these movies kind of do the same shit. The complaints I have for one, the other one did. And so where it comes down to it, the Glimmer Man is more fun than Hickey and Boggs, and it's just a better movie because like the acting in it, especially from the two leads, the side characters are all about the same, but the two leads, I feel like, yeah, Keenan Ivory Wayans and Steven Seagal work together a lot better in this film because one, they're not trying to be something they're not, and they're playing up their strengths more than anything. So for anybody keeping score, that is 68-57. The 70s are only up by 11. This has been a 4-film streak for the 90s, so they're really kicking ass right now, you know. But that lead is still pretty wide. You know, it's going to take a few more for the 90s to take the lead, but who knows? 4 in a row, they might fucking blow ahead. So if I've said anything wrong, anything you disagree with, feel free to eviscerate me in the comments. You know, this is all up for debate. This is open forum. There's one asshole's opinion on a very self-indulgent journey to see which decade was better for movies, the 70s or the 90s. And right now the 90s are kicking ass, but they still got a long way to go before they can take the 70s. So stay tuned for all that shit. It's going to be a wild ride.